Hello, messy families. Thank you for joining us. We are glad you're here. And we are glad that we're here too, because this would be awkward if it was otherwise.
We have the best interview for you today. Oh. This is seriously, we had these questions that listeners will send us, and it's kind of like we called a lifeline, and we brought in an expert, and we met her in person at Seek. And then we were like, made that connection, and we were like, oh, well, let's just like talk. And then I was like, oh my gosh, we need to have you answer some of these questions that people send us. And it was so great.
So you clicked on it, so you know what we're talking about here. But this is a topic that as Catholic couples, as Christian couples, we don't spend enough time talking about.
Absolutely.
There's never a homily that's given on this. There's never time where we really, even in our own marriages, spend time talking about this. So you're going to want to listen to this. You're going to want to send this to your spouse. You will thank us later. That's all I want to say.
And at the end, we're going to give you key takeaways and then also some couple discussion questions.
But before we get to that, I just want to make sure you all heard the exciting news. We mentioned it last week.
We're like, speaking of intimacy and time together.
We love marriages. We love helping parents be energized, to be more both fulfilled and reinvigorated. And we saw an opportunity in creating Catholic couples getaways. And so as we announced last week, the Catholic couple getaway for 2025 or 24 and 25. So we're adding a new one that's going to be in the Colorado Springs, the Rocky Mountain getaway for couples, as well as Costa Rica with Chris and Natalie Stefanik.
Yes.
Father Sean Monahan, one of the Oblates, is going to be joining us down there. Very, very special time. Both of these getaways are going to knock your socks off.
And this is we are talking about intimacy, so we're kind of like on this vein. It's not just your socks. No.
Yes.
But seriously, the reason we started doing these getaways is because Catholic couples who have a lot of kids, who have little kids, who are serving the church, who are doing all of these things, have to recognize that all of the things that they do, the ways they give themselves away, that has to come from the spring, from the font of grace that is their marriage.
That's right.
You have got to take care of your marriage if you're going to serve your children, if you're going to serve your grandkids, if you're going to serve your church, which is what we all do, right? We have got to take care of our marriage. And so this is, first of all, it is not a marriage retreat. All right. So don't think, we're going to be coming and it's all talks.
Like super intense.
Spiritual direction, It is not. It is not. We do have opportunity for confession, opportunity for mentoring, opportunity for spiritual direction, mass every day, right? We do have that. We're inviting the Lord to be with us. But we also are going to be giving you some great tools and things to talk about. And then lots of time to do that. Lots of leisure time between lunch and dinner. All of that time is yours. So you can relax, so you can meet other couples that share your values if you want to, or if you're like, you know what, we just want to be alone. You can do that too. That's why we pick a resort that's big enough that people can spread out and find the way that they can be recreated, which is going to be a little bit different for everybody.
And we are only choosing places that are beautiful. We're only choosing places that are really attractive.
Absolutely.
And I have to tell you, there were many people in our last getaway, many dads particularly, many men said to me, it's like, you kind of tricked me into this. You know, I wanted to come because it was a beautiful resort. You know, it was a beautiful resort. I mean, what one dad said to me just recently, actually talking about Colorado Springs, he said, you know, a romantic getaway with my wife is like pizza was to me when I was a college student. Like I'm all about it. Right. And, but
slightly more expensive,
but much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And, so, there were so many who came to this who were just like, this was the best experience we've had in our life. Not because it was us, but because we created this environment where, as Alicia said, you come into a deeper encounter with the Lord and all of this. It's not a pure retreat, but it's got elements of it, some of the strong elements of a good retreat. It's not particularly just a marriage workshop where there's a lot of intense work. It's pretty low key, but we do offer both some tools, some inspiration, some really encountering a new level in your relationship. And there's just a lot of leisure, a lot of recreation, a time for you to really be renewed.
And you know what? It was the best compliment that we got. I think someone said, I'm leaving this retreat.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like, oh, I wish I could stay longer, I am leaving this retreat refreshed and renewed and ready to jump back into my family life with new energy. When they said that, I was like, that's exactly what we're going for.
Yeah.
We don't want people to feel like, oh, I never want to go home again. No, that's escapism. That's not what we want. We want you to be refreshed. So you're like, I can't wait to get home and give myself to my kids and my community and to kind of like keep using these tools, these great tools we've learned. So
anyway, if you are at all interested, please let us know. Even if you can't make these ones, it's good for us to know you're interested in a future one. But these ones will probably fill up, right? And so Colorado Springs is in September of this year. So it's soon. So that's going to probably fill up quicker because of our limited time frame there. And then the other one in Costa Rica with Chris and Natalie Stefanik. We already have people depositing in early, pre-booking. I don't want to turn anybody away.
Early bird is
we can
ending
adjust
soon.
size. Yeah, it is. So
the
you
early
want
bird is ending really soon.
May 15th for Colorado Springs, and so you want to get in there. Anyway, Catholic Couples Getaway. It's going to be awesome. We'd love to see you. We'd love to visit with you, and this would be a great excuse for us to spend time on our marriage. When do you spend time on your marriage? This would be a great gift. You know, we're coming up on Mother's Day.
Oh my gosh, guys.
I just want to give you...
You would be the best husband ever.
You want to rank really high. And if you're a wife, maybe just send this little email or this podcast off to them, right?
Mother's Day gift. You know.
Anyway.
But you know what? Honestly, this podcast that we're going to be listening to, after listening to this podcast, you definitely want to kind of come on the getaway.
Again, talking about physical intimacy, this is a powerful and important topic.
Yes.
Ellen does a great job responding to some questions that we get.
She's so much fun. She's so much fun and very joyful.
There was more insight than I thought. So take a listen and we'll come back and share some takeaways and some questions for you. We are so lucky to have you on our program today. We're so welcoming.
So welcoming.
We are so welcoming.
We are
welcomed that you're. Thank you. And
words are hard.
You know what? I don't want to edit that out. Because,
are you uncomfortable about this conversation?
You know what? When I'm surrounded by two beautiful women and we're going to be talking about something pretty intimate, my words are getting a little bit.
It's a safe space.
Is this okay?
It's a safe space.
Yes. Well, Ellen, it is wonderful to have you with us, and we're really excited about the topic because it's an important topic. But some people can be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean. I am so happy to be here. Thank you guys both so much for having me.
Well, I'm so glad you stopped by. So Ellen is the host of Charting Towards Intimacy, and she has her own, her podcast. And then she has her own organization, Vines in Full Bloom, where she offers courses and resources is it for men and women or just for women?
I like to say women and couples, because I definitely do coaching one-on-one with women, but then also I will do couples. But I don't do like just men one-on-one, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Because that would be weird.
It would be. It absolutely would be weird.
It's a little inappropriate.
All right. So if we didn't already make
stay in your lane.
I'm going to repeat this disclaimer here, but this is a conversation for married adults. So if you have little kids, this is a time where you want to hit pause on your
put in your
podcast.
earbuds. Wait till you drop off the kids at school, because we need to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
I just want to say that first of all, and I know obviously you've dedicated, your professional life here, as well as being a mother and all of that, but dedicated your energy to talking about this. Can I just ask really quick before we get into some of our questions, why are you so passionate about doing what you do? What has like lit that fire in you to do the ministry that you're doing?
Yeah. My husband and I, about a month into being married, we hit rock bottom very fast. And it was all because of a misunderstanding of the beauty and depth and purpose of sex and intimacy. We were kind of sold a terrible lie from culture. Our marriage prep was non-existent in the space of sex and intimacy. And we just immediately, I mean, we were married for a few weeks and we're like, oh my gosh, have we made the most terrible mistake ever? Why are we even doing this?
Oh gosh.
And it took effort and prayer and just clinging to each other and to God to dig ourselves out of a hole that we had just gotten into in so quickly. I mean, it's so funny because people talk about the honeymoon stage of marriage. And I'm like, I would never want to go back to the first 6 months of my marriage. Never. I just, that was the
totally different.
We're moving on. Like we are beyond that. And we are in such an amazing place
Lord.
now. Like, thank you, Lord. Yeah. But it was, I mean, it was everything of I was really influenced by this lie of purity culture and sex was bad and dirty. And so I was very wounded in that way. My husband, he had his own wounds in just kind of almost the opposite of that, the pendulum swing to the other side. And then there was also, we didn't understand the church teaching on contraception and MFP. And so we also had that on top of all of these other wounds that we had. And so, you know, you can kind of see how that would just explode in a very short amount of time.
I was just going to say, it's just like this, you know, it's just like this huge clash of worldviews.
Perfect storm.
Yeah.
Perfect
and
storm.
You're both trying to do what is right, but not even understanding what is right.
Yeah.
And so that led you to start doing your own research or what?
Yes. So we started with NFP, getting to know what natural family planning was and learning about that. And then that really led us on this journey of theology of the body, beautiful, you know, writings from John Paul II. His Love and Responsibility book was really powerful for us. And then that has just gone further and further. The podcast that I host, Charting Toward Intimacy, it actually originally started as a natural family planning promotion podcast. I was talking about natural family planning and living out that life, which is so important to talk about. But as I got more into that, I really realized that there was this gaping hole of authentically Catholic, practical sex education for married adults of, okay, this isn't, something's not working in our sex life, or I'm not understanding pleasure, or I don't have any desire, or my libido is gone, or, you know, all of these things. And they're not questions you want to Google. You don't know who to ask. You don't really want to go to the priest to ask those questions. Like, he's not going to know.
Exactly.
So where do you go with that?
Exactly. And so that is what I'm trying to do with my business, is provide that authentically Catholic, practical sex education information. My little tagline for the podcast is that this is, my mission is to help women actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with their spouse. Like, that's the goal.
That's a great tagline.
What man would want to get behind that?
I want all wives.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, I think that just opening these conversations a lot of times is the first hurdle, you know, and just like being able to speak about this act, this marital act, which is so integral to our marriage, much more than they say like Satan's lie was to get people to have as much sex as possible outside of marriage,
before marriage,
and then as little sex as possible within marriage.
Yeah.
And we want to come against that and say that is a lie. Like this, we should be having good, healthy, pleasurable, amazing sex for your entire marriage.
Yes.
From start to finish.
Absolutely.
And it's
this is why I love this woman. This is.
And you keep learning. That's the beautiful thing.
Exactly.
Is that, you're never done.
Me doing this ministry has been so healing for my own journey with sex and intimacy. Like I said, the podcast started as an NFP podcast. I still wasn't anywhere near where I am on the healing journey with sex and intimacy when I started this podcast, because I was really focused on the NFP side of things, which again is fantastic. But I've grown and learned so much just through doing this ministry that now I look back and I see I want to help people come on the journey that I've been on, because I can truthfully and honestly say that I have an amazing sex life, and that is so good and holy, right? Like, but who says that, right?
Yes. Exactly.
No, but again, you've already said this, but it's just like people don't talk about this.
Yeah.
And we rarely hear a homily about marriage at all, right?
True.
So where is a Catholic to get this information? When it's not coming through a homily, and I don't think I want a homily necessarily on the practical and
little children there.
And there is a discomfort, even like, we've been doing this ministry for a while. I love when we have somebody else who can talk about this, right? Because there is a level of intimacy just with the very topic. Like there's something that, I want to extol that this isn't, like we've talked before about, it's not just good, it's not just great. It's sacred, and there, because it's sacred, there is a rightful kind of like, guarding or protection that we want to put around it, a veil of sorts, right?
Exactly.
We want to pull everything back. However, we
At
need
the
to
same
talk.
time.
We need to talk about this because it is so vital to our marriage. It's so vital to
the health of our marriage.
Yeah, and the church talks about the importance of it, but sometimes we're like, well, wait. What does it actually mean? What was that insinuating? What is it implying? What are the assumptions here? And one of the things that we talk about a lot is this dance between emotional and physical intimacy.
Right.
And that there is the unity we strive for isn't purely physical, and it isn't purely emotional. We are a body-soul composite as human beings, and that. But there is we can all think about foreplay in a physical sense, but there's also emotional foreplay. What role, if I can put that the first question right, what role does foreplay have? And both in its kind of an emotional aspect as well as in a physical aspect in physical intimacy.
Absolutely. So before I go into kind of answering that question, I want to propose something that this is kind of some terminology that might help when thinking about foreplay. Is I see foreplay in two different categories. I see anticipatory foreplay and escalatory foreplay. So what I mean by those two things is escalatory foreplay is what is happening directly prior to intercourse. That's part of the sexual act, truly, that foreplay. And escalatory foreplay is typically going to be very physical, while also including some emotional components to it, and might involve conversation and talking and things like that. But that's what's happening like directly prior to intercourse. That is what is arousing the spouses. But the anticipatory foreplay, that is what is happening all day, every day. That is preparing you for coming together in this most beautiful, unitive, intimate act at some other time. And so that anticipatory foreplay is going to be a lot more emotional in its nature of more, conversation and making sure that your spouse is feeling loved, speaking their love language. I love the love languages. And so just focusing on those kinds of things. But then also that anticipatory foreplay can also include direct allusion to having sex later, right? Of maybe having that little text message and like, I can't wait for you to get home tonight. I'm looking forward to, I'm setting up the bedroom, right? Or whatever's right for your relationship. Or right before somebody leaves for work is giving a kiss and whispering in the ears of, okay, well, when you come home tonight, get ready for a surprise, right? That can be part of that anticipatory foreplay, which, that's maybe a little bit more physical as well. But also still like really touching into that emotional. And so when I see these, the emotional needs and the physical needs, I see that emotional need often needs to be filled first. And that's where what I'm talking about with that anticipatory foreplay, it's so much more emotional in nature. And just really making sure that is something that has really been filled up, been bolstered up, so that the physical often is just a beautiful reflection of feeling filled up in that emotional intimacy. And it just becomes this perfect fruit of that intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. I heard it once said that like a woman, when she is in her role as a mother, it's so hard for her mind to transition to just kind of like click, to be be in her role as a wife, And so it's just like, if she's like on the floor with the kids or changing a diaper, like maybe that, like if her husband says something to her about like, oh, hey, later tonight, maybe that wouldn't be received at that moment because she's like, I'm in my hands and poop right now. Like, like how would you suggest navigating that for husbands and wives?
Sure.
And like helping her get in that right mindset.
Normal, right.
Yeah. Getting in that mindset.
Yeah. I think there's kind of two things. One is that both spouses should really just be aware of where their spouse is in the day.
Right.
Right. So, in that example, right, of mom is home and, changing diapers all day and making sure that the house is clean and food is cooked and everybody's fed and happy. Husband who's at work, it might not be the best thing for him to text her about sex, but it might be a really good time for him to text her, tapping into that emotional need that she has and say, well, thank you for being home with our kids right now. Thank you so much for, I know that you're cooking dinner right now, and thank you so much for that later. Right. And, and, we can do the flip side, right? The, mom who's at home, she can be aware of like what's going on with her husband right now. And and maybe, that texting your husband in the middle of the day, not the best thing to like specifically call out sex. Right. But again, be grateful, bring in that gratefulness. Thank you so much for going to work for us. Thank you so much for working hard. I know you've got a big meeting today. I'm praying for you, those kinds of things. So I think a lot of it really just takes awareness, because every relationship is also going to be very different. Some women really would like to have that kind of reminder about sex throughout the day, because that actually kind of helps to prepare them. So maybe it's a couple of sticky notes around the house, but for other women, that's going to be like a big turnoff. And actually do the opposite of helpful. And so I think this is something that like really individually, we should kind of think about, okay, what would be helpful for me? And then have that conversation, come together as husband and wife and say, hey, I think that these things would be really helpful for me. If you could send me these text messages or, that kind of thing.
Because every couple is so different, and every person is so different. And so I think that we can get ourselves into trouble when we say, oh, this is the way that you should do it. Like I was thinking about like in the 70s, how like people were like, oh, wrap yourself in cellophane and, like and make a big turn on. And it's like, maybe for some men and women that really worked. And maybe for some, they were like, what are you doing? What is this? And it's because, and it's like, this is not a right or wrong thing. This is that every couple is so different, but how are you going to find out what your spouse wants or needs or what turns them on or what turns them off if you don't have that conversation?
Exactly.
Like you have to
talk about it. You have to talk about it.
Well, and I just think about the, for dads, I often say emotional intimacy or sharing your feelings is great foreplay. And I like the distinction you have made with that's more anticipatory and it's kind of setting the stage. And I think it's vital, just kind of what you both have said is just that I think more so for women than men, that women need their mind is often the environment they're in. So if they're in mommy mode, they're not ready. I'd say many men would love a text regarding whatever meeting I was in, that was.
It would make you smile.
It would make me smile. But I do think that for women particularly, there is a need to be sensitive and aware that their environment does dictate where their mind set is at, and that helping a woman, and I guess I'd love for your comment on this, but helping a woman, again, we often say reminding her that before she was a mommy, she's your bride, and helping make that kind of environmental or mindset shift. To help her, not
to remind her.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I don't know if you've seen that play out, but that's knowing what's going to work for one woman isn't universal, but I think there is some universal principles, right? On making that shift, right?
Yeah. And I think that there's something else, and this is very, very common that can be really helpful for women, especially mothers, is having a transition time between being mom and then having that intimate time with your spouse. And so whether that is 10 minutes just by yourself in the room, reading the Bible and just letting yourself just calm down from the day, or maybe that's even washing the dishes by yourself and kids are, dad is taking care of bedtime, but you're able to just have this quiet time by yourself, but having a transition instead of kids are in bed, we just closed the doors, check, let's go take off our clothes. Like that's overwhelming. That can be so overwhelming. You might be listening to this and go, well, that sounds great. Awesome. If that works for you, that's great. But I think a lot of women can really benefit from having a 10 to 15 minute kind of transition time.
No, you know what? Actually, and that kind of goes into a next question that we had about being wives, wives specifically, being available to their husbands, or the phrase that we use when we do our marriage talks a lot is joyfully available. And that's not just, and so what I mean by that is not just, okay, we got to have sex because we're Catholic and, I'm not fertile right now, so we got to do this for our relationship, That's like servicing your husband. Husbands don't want to be serviced, that's not a thing. They want you to give yourself, to be available to them. And that's like a disposition of the heart.
Absolutely.
But I think that it's like a nuance, because and I just would love to help women to understand this, and you probably have better verbiage than I do. What is the difference between being joyfully available and just putting out? Or like the fundamentalist, Protestant idea of, every time my husband wants sex, I need to give it to him. Done. That's not what you or I mean. But how would you describe that correct disposition of a wife to be joyfully available for her husband?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the word here that I love that you have here is that joyful. And we have often a misunderstanding of what joy means. We think of joy, like joy equals happiness, and that's not right. Joy is a disposition of the heart. It is an open willingness to the will of God. And so when you say being joyfully available, that's an open willingness to uniting with your spouse and building intimacy through that unity. Whereas being like putting out or, just always being available, that's not open. I see that as very closed of like, I have this thing that I will give to you, but like begrudgingly. Versus,
exactly.
Yeah. Versus like, I am your wife and I am open to you. Right. And that's physically what we as women have to do in sex. We have to physically open. That's part of arousal, is that the vaginal canal elongates, the vaginal opening widens. We literally physically opening. And so we have to look at that biology and let that biology inform the theology that's going on here, is that we are spiritually open to our spouse and spiritually open to uniting and becoming an image of God, because that's what's happening when husband and wife come together, is that these two are becoming one. We have this beautiful image of God in the Trinity happening right there between husband and wife in the marriage bed, which is amazing. Yeah. Now, I feel like I said that all very theologically, and somebody's like, okay, but like practically, what's the difference here?
Yeah.
And I tend to do that, so I apologize.
No, you're good.
But so going back to that, like joy, right? That joyfully being open. I think one of the things I like to talk to my one-on-one clients about when they're feeling this wrestling between, okay, but my husband asks and I don't want to have sex. And like, so how do I say no, or do I have to say yes? Right. Is think about, what is sex? It is like the grandest form of unity that we can have between husband and wife. And so if you're not there with joyfully being ready to say yes to sex, what are you ready to say yes to as far as uniting with your spouse? Are you...
That's good.
Yeah.
Like focus on where you're at. What is the good here? What am I willing to do?
Exactly. And so that might mean having a conversation, just sitting down and just having some time together. That might mean snuggling, or kissing a little bit, playing a game together, just having some touch time, being in contact with each other. That physical touch is so important. And so just allowing yourself to open up to what are you kind of joyfully willing to do? What are you joyfully available to do? And if you're not joyfully available to have sex, like maybe that's not right for today then, because you should be joyfully available, right? It should be a joy. And so what is that you are joyfully available to do? And I think that's something that outside of the context is a really good conversation to have with your spouse, in just saying like, hey, when I'm not feeling in the mood for sex, when I really can't, wrap my head around that, what are some things that would help you feel united with me? Would you like to do some snuggle time? Would you like to, hold hands and watch a movie together, or, read a book, or, those kinds of things?
So, but then I'm just going to like go personal a little further.
Sure.
Okay. So the woman who's having even more of a difficulty, because what happens then, first of all, I love your answer so much. Like that is such a great starting point. Well, then what about when a woman is having those mental health crises, like a real postpartum depression? So many women have hormonal imbalances that are very real, that are very, very difficult. And you know what? And it's like, okay, it's a slight, like, you know, side note, tangent. There is something with all of the hormones in our water and our diet everything that so many women have these huge hormone swings and we are so affected by that. So putting that aside and then looking at, okay, so what happens when a woman is 3 months after having a baby and she is still really just tired and depressed and down? Then
what does that mean for their marriage?
And what does that mean for their marriage? Yeah. Is there advice that you would get for husband and wife? Actually, if you want to throw in some, you know, because this is both.
Absolutely.
At this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely both. I think one of the things that we as Catholics as a whole need to kind of get over is seeking out help. You know, a situation where a woman is 3 months postpartum and she is still feeling very down and very exhausted and has no desire for sex. I think that therapy might be extremely helpful in this situation.
Because you would say that's not normal. We should not accept that.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I think that's important for you to say that. I think it's so important to say that. Like, this is not okay for you.
For your marriage, for you
your
personally.
marriage.
It is not. It's not. Women, you should not have zero libido. You should not be so exhausted and tired from your day that you cannot even fathom having sex. That's not normal. And so let's fix that. Don't just accept that and try to grin and bear it and push through and put out for your husband just to make him happy. That's not going to help you. But instead, let's get to the root cause. I hear this a lot. This is a little bit tangential to what you were saying, but a lot of women will say things like, oh, my hormones dictate, you know, my interest in sex. And so when I'm in my fertile window and when estrogen is highest, that's the only time I want to have sex. That's not actually how hormones work. That's not how sex drive works with women. Testosterone is the sex drive. Estrogen actually has very little to do with sex drive. What estrogen does, though, is it affects your energy level. So during the cycle, I'll try to do this as briefly as possible. During the cycle, we start the cycle, estrogen starts to rise right around ovulation. That's when estrogen peaks. It's going to go down very quickly. And after ovulation, that's when progesterone is going to be the highest. We have roughly 2 weeks of estrogen and roughly 2 weeks of progesterone. Estrogen gives you lots of energy. It's an upper. Progesterone takes your energy down. It's a downer. Your sex drive has so much more to do with your energy level than anything else. The amount of sleep you get has so much more to do with your sex drive than what you eat, than where you are in your cycle, than anything else. So can I just say, can I add one little thing?
Absolutely. One little thing to
don't forget where you were.
Because this is something, I'm in menopause. Okay. So I'm 52 years old, been in menopause for 5 years now. Guess what? I don't have those estrogen going up the way it did when I was fertile. And what does that mean then? So if a woman says, I'm only interested in sex when I'm fertile, what is she going to do for those, hopefully, if God blesses her for 30, 40 years of marriage after she goes through menopause,
yes.
What are you going to do then, lady? It's like I totally agree with what you're saying because I've thought about this now that I'm in menopause,
right.
I don't have those ups and downs. It was like, wait a second. I think I was believing that I wanted more sex because I was fertile, but I think it was an energy issue more than anything else. And that's such an excellent point. So continue. I just wanted to just throw that in there.
Absolutely. Well, and it's become, I see this a lot in like the NFP Facebook groups that it's like, oh my gosh, NFP is so unfair because I only want to have sex with my husband during my fertile window. And I just want to scream it from the rooftops. Like, that's not normal. That's actually not how it should be. And so If you are experiencing that, then we can do something about it. So what you need to do then is look at the times outside of that fertile window. And are you getting 8 hours of sleep? If you're not, make that happen. Truly tell your husband, look, this lady on this podcast told me that if I get 8 hours of sleep, then I'll have more sex drive. Your husband is going to get on board with that. He's okay. What do we have to do?
That's right.
Great.
Sign me up.
Sign me up with the baby. I can do that. Yeah.
That's right.
Exactly.
Right.
But truly, like, how can you, looking in that luteal phase when your progesterone is high and you've got less energy, what can you take off your plate then? Do you get a little bit more takeout during that time, or do some frozen dinners to take some stress off of cooking dinner? Do you, do you get some more childcare to have somebody help out in the evenings? Are there things that your husband can take off of the plate? Can you somehow work in a nap? Like, that'd be great. What kinds of things can you offload off of your plate during that time, so that you can allow your body to have energy for sex? Because the difference here between men and women in kind of a evolutionary thing is that men, when they have less sleep and are stressed, are often more likely to want to have sex, because evolutionary, if a man is stressed, it's like, oh my gosh, I might not live. I need to make sure that the human race continues. Women, on the other hand, if women are stressed, they're like, I cannot get pregnant right now because that I won't live and I won't be able to carry the child.
Can't handle another person. Right. Yes.
And so we've got to get ourselves out of that mode. And our lives are so stressful right now. We've got so many more things on our plate than we need to have. And so what can you take off the plate? What can you pause on doing during that time of your cycle, if you're still cycling, right? And if you're not, right, how can you focus on making sure that you get enough rest? Because that is like the number one thing, is making sure that you get enough sleep. And I think one of the things that women in menopause struggle with is sleeping through the night. So making sure that you are eating enough calories to allow your body to sleep through the night. That is one of the number one things that stops women postmenopausal sleeping through the night, is that if you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning every night, you're not eating enough calories to get yourself through the night.
Right.
So eat a bigger dinner.
Okay. So Mike, what do I do almost every night before I go to bed?
She's having like cheese and olives, all these protein and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. I'm like, before I go to bed, I'm like, I have to have, and right now I'm on a cheese kick. So I'm like, I have to have cheese and some like salami, and I'll have a little bit of wine, it's like, I have to get that to get me through, because I did not realize that was a postmenopausal thing. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, no, it's your metabolism has changed, and so you kind of have to spread your calories out a little bit better, because your body it uses them differently. And so like, have a nighttime snack right before you go to sleep. It's perfect.
All right, so going off of sleep.
Thank you for that. I feel normal now. This is awesome.
All right, so something.
Getting back to sex and eating.
No. Right. Going with this, right? The idea that we believe sex is not a leisure time activity that we only engage in when all the stars align, when all the laundry is done and all this. And
have you seen the Business Time? That song. It's from Business Time.
The Flight of the Conchords.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, it's like, that's the picture he paints. Oh, it's perfect. We have to do it tonight. It's perfect. Everything is perfect. It's like, no, wait a second.
So, but it is so important to come together, but our lives are busy. We do, we're frantic, we're this, we're that.
Screens.
How do you look at sex? Like, how do you fit in times when you've got, at least for us, back in the day, right? We had, little kids who are waking you up early, teens who might be keeping you up late. We kind of talked about sleep and all of that. How do we make sex and make our coming together a priority.
I should say how you motivate. Like, what words would you say to motivate a couple
yes
to figure that out?
And because too many people put their kids as an excuse, or they're just tired. And what would you respond to that excuse or that situation, and what would you motivate, or how would you share to encourage them in their physical intimacy?
One of the things I like to talk about a lot is the similarities between sex and prayer. And so, and I talk a lot about this on my podcast. And so maybe check out a couple of episodes there if you want to get into that a little bit more. I actually have a specific episode on, sex and prayer. But with prayer, if we look at prayer, we know we have to make that a priority in our lives. If we're on the Christian journey, if we want to get to heaven, we need to pray. We need to know our Lord. We need to have conversation with him, right? The same goes for sex. If you want to get to heaven, the sex is kind of part of it if you're married. This needs to be a priority. True story.
Yes.
And so I like to kind of put that out there of just that understanding of see sex as something that you need to prioritize. Then, I say that tentatively though, because don't make it a checkbox. A couple of months ago, I put something on social media, and it was when I say make sex a priority, what people think I mean. And I was writing down this just to-do list of terrible tasks of do the laundry and clean the dishes and have sex, right? That is not what I mean. When I say make sex a priority, it's put those tasks to the side and set aside that time, and know yourself. What things have to be done for you to have the mental capacity for sex? Are you the type of person that the kitchen has to be clean, but everything else not as big of a deal? Okay, make that a priority. Fit that in and do the laundry later, right? Know yourself. I think one that is really, really common for women is that the bedroom that you are having sex in needs to be orderly, needs to be clean. And so allow that space to be a safe haven. Keep it clean and orderly. Get stuff out of there that doesn't belong there. You don't need kids' toys in your bedroom. You do not just
Amen.
Out.
Preach it.
You don't need that reminder.
You do not need them there. Or kids' clothes or kids. You don't you just don't need that stuff.
Right.
So good. So true.
Yeah. Now, so one of the when you're talking about that relationship between sex and prayer, that is a really good point, because we can make prayer a checkbox.
Absolutely.
We can just be showing up just because we have to. And that's not what our Lord wants. God doesn't want that from us. He wants our hearts. He's happy that we're there, just like, your husband or your wife. Hey, if you're just showing up, hey, they're happy you're there, but what they really want is your heart. And that's what our Lord really wants, And actually, I'm in the middle of reading Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And one of the things, I had heard about it for years, and my sister read it, and I was just like, I really need to get into reading this again. It's very simple, but it talks about, and again, this reminds me of the husband-wife relationship also. He just talks about throughout, that prayer is a very special time for him to commune with the Lord and be aware of God's love for him. But he does that throughout the day. He's even throughout the day, as I'm washing dishes, if people are calling my name, if I have to be doing all of these different tasks, he was always aware that God was watching him, aware of God's presence, how God was moving in his heart, and the more he did it, the more he was aware of that. And it makes me think of husband and wife always. And I remember hearing this once in a marriage talk, that a strategy to make your marriage stronger is to be thinking about your spouse, especially if you're apart, during the day. Where are they at work? What are they doing right now? Just that consciousness of where they are. And if dad's at work, what's mom doing right now? Where is she at with the kids? Or if mom's working, where is she at in her work right now? But to be able to have that in our mind, to be conscious of the presence of the other person, of your spouse, of your beloved, to have that intimacy. So then when you do come together, you can be there.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You can be fully
It's preparing
present.
your heart and mind for that.
Yeah. But I love what you're saying, though, too, about knowing what your needs are, because then you're going to be, hey, in order for me, because I so want to give myself to my husband, to love him in this way, but I got to have the kitchen cleaned. I have to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very...
Make that happen.
Yeah, make it happen. Make it a priority.
Respect your own needs.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Well, a little bit more on that connection of sex and prayer. And this is, I go really deep into this in that podcast episode about sex and prayer and how they're connected. But there is a catechism quote. I don't know it completely off the top of my head, but it's in the section on prayer. And it talks about that prayer cannot be reduced to kind of that spontaneous outpouring of our heart. If one wants to pray, he has to have the will to do so. And the same goes for sex. We cannot reduce sex to that spontaneous physical arousal. If you want to unite fully with your spouse, you have to have a will to do so, a joyful will, not a checkbox will. You need to choose to come together and unite with your spouse and be that full gift of self to them.
That's great.
Reminds me of like the will and emotions, like the, oh my gosh, you know what I'm talking about. Like that.
The thought, feeling, action. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because just recognizing that as human beings, we often go through a place where we can override the emotions, lose the emotions and like white knuckle it. But we really can't do that very long. We can kind of will it, know. But we need to recognize that our mind and our will and our emotions are meant to be a concert of actions, rather than it simply be. I mean, it requires the will, but it's not merely,
not only the will.
It's not just like we're just forcing it, Like we're not just saying we're just gonna get it done, No, that's not what we're talking about. It's aligning the gift that God gave us in our intellect, in our will, and our emotions in concert together. Because I do think that when you look at the way that God gifted us sex, when he's given us this physically most intimate connection and communion, it is probably the time before heaven that we experience the most alignment of our mind, our heart, our will, our emotions, our body. Everything is when done properly, right?
Yes.
When in marriage and done with joy, when done with great love, when done with all of it is a fullness. Like there's rarely a time in our lives where we have everything oriented towards the good of another in such a beautiful way. And there is something that I think a lot of Catholics, and you kind of alluded to your, you maybe didn't say it this way, but puritanical or kind of having this more prudish approach to sex that does influence us, right? Because we often see the secular world and we respond to it. And as Catholics, we have this funny relationship with pleasure. And in the sense that we don't want to pleasure. Yeah, this dance between knowing that pleasure isn't my goal per se in the physical act, but if it's not pleasurable, that's not also good. Like and pleasure is a byproduct, but I want to make sure I am bringing sexual satisfaction to my spouse. And can you talk just a little bit about that dance, or that kind of a Catholic approach to understanding
mutual sexual pleasure?
Mutual sexual pleasure, how that fits in a truly joyful marriage and physical intimacy?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I see a lot is almost a fear of experiencing sexual pleasure, because there is a fear of then like falling into lust and following our concupiscence into then grasping for that pleasure, and somehow sexual pleasure has gotten very twisted up with kind of the sex positive culture, and that, oh, well, that's all bad, so sexual pleasure is too.
Yeah.
So there's this fear,
Right.
and that fear, I think, is something that we really need to look at and bring it to God and say, okay, what I'm fearing this. I'm fearing of stepping into, or, stepping over the line. Right. And I see this a lot with those of us who have been really impacted by that puritanical, that purity culture, that kind of like, don't do sex because it's bad, which is so wrong. It's don't have sex before marriage because it's so good that it doesn't fit there. Right. And so we need to open that fear up and recognize that it's fear. And then we need to recognize that this sexual pleasure is part of the act that God gave us. Women and men's bodies are not the same. Surprise, surprise. Women's bodies have an organ whose sole purpose is sexual pleasure. Men don't have that. So women's bodies have the clitoris, the only purpose of the clitoris. It has no other biological purpose than sexual pleasure. Men, their penis is that similar spot of the sexual pleasure organ, but it also has 4 other functions. It does a lot.
Right.
And so we need to kind of see that beauty in the biology and see the goodness here. And we can look at how the man's sexual pleasure is inherently connected to the procreative purpose of sex. So we can see that. And so we can know that that sexual pleasure is very important, because the procreative purpose of sex is extremely important. So God connected those. They are one in the same. Sexual pleasure and ejaculation happen together for the man.
I've never thought about that in that way, but what a great point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Our biology is revealing.
Absolutely.
It's revealing the truth of how important. I mean, God made this so important. This is something I talk quite a bit about in my orgasm course for Catholic women. So I created a course that is specifically on sexual pleasure for Catholic women and how to get to orgasm, and how to do so in a way that is receiving and not grasping, because that's something else that is so misunderstood in our secular culture. It's like, I gotta get, I want to grab at this sexual pleasure. That's where we get things like masturbation and pornography. It's grasping at getting that sexual pleasure. Yeah. But receiving, this is something I also say in my orgasm course, receiving sexual pleasure from our husband is a school of receiving love from the Father. When we learn how to open and receive that deep, intimate, unitive pleasure, we're also learning how to open up to God. And that might seem a little bit much. You're like, whoa. But
I don't know.
Just
that works
take
for me.
it, right? Take it with you. Take it to adoration. Yeah. Take it to your prayer hour, because it's just, it's just truth.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Well, because what makes me think of is just today I was talking with a group of friends about how generous God is. We constantly underestimate God's generosity to us. He doesn't just want to be like, okay, I only have this much grace. I'm just going to give this to this person. So that means you're going to have to just suffer. No, it's like, he can give grace to this person and we can will that good for that person. Then he's like, you know what? I'm going to give you 10 times as much grace as you had before, because he is so generous and he loves when we are generous, you know? And so just you kind of like saying that about us, of being that willingness, that openness to like, I'm going to give myself over to my husband and receive that pleasure. It's like we have to recognize that God, our Heavenly Father, when we go to prayer, we should just receive his love. We don't have to do anything.
Yes.
We don't have to gin up any emotion. We can just receive his love. I absolutely see how those things are related, and it's what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's not something that we necessarily deserve in a way.
Oh,
we don't have to work towards it.
True.
Unmerited. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's not like I'm working up to this. I just need to just stop, relax, and just receive.
Yeah.
And,
just receive.
And there's something that we've really kind of spent more time on just recently, just thinking about the receiving, that there is a kind of a primary role for women to receive first so that she can give, but that men are initially the givers in order to receive, and that we both need giving and receiving. And at different times it may switch a little bit, but there is something so beautiful, obviously mapped in our bodies, God's design, about particularly the woman receiving that. And even in the biology that there is that, right? And for both of us, and this is where, again, I'll just say spiritually, it's harder for men often to think of themselves as receiving from God, because we feel like we need to do, we need to go, we need to give, and we need to learn from our wives about how to receive that. But in this physical act, there's just something powerful about that. That really is, it's not only just a bonding thing, it's really bears a lot of fruit in your physical intimacy, your emotional intimacy, and in your spiritual intimacy.
You know what? Can I ask you a question, Ellen, about that, the men and that giving, in that for some women, again, this is kind of going against this like purity culture and whatever. And maybe it has to do with understanding men. I think that sometimes women can see their husband's great desire for them and their desire for union and make judgments on the heart of their husband, and make judgments on like that this is lust. But I asked my mom, actually, when I was a young married woman, I said something like, have you ever, made love or during sex have thought he's forgetting about me? He's forgetting about me. He's just thinking about himself. And she said, you know what? Anytime those kind of thoughts would come into my mind, I just would remind myself how often he takes out the trash. He takes care of our home. He goes to work for me. Like kind of like in her mind, giving her husband the benefit of the doubt. It's like, but anyway, I just wonder if there's another way you can speak to that, because that's such a temptation for women, especially if you're a young married woman who doesn't understand men, or you're just learning about men, you're learning about your husband, and you see this strength,
desire,
and this desire,
big. It's big,
and we make judgments on it.
Yes,
it's big. It's like what advice would you give to this woman? How can they understand that better?
Yeah, well, I want to say two things. One is something that's hard to do, that we need to learn how to do, is just trusting our spouses.
Yes.
And we need to trust that our husband is coming to us out of love and not out of lust. And I really encourage to read the prayer of in Tobit of Tobias.
Yes.
And Sarah, but it's Tobias's words. Just pray with that, because I think there's just some beautiful words in there about, I take this woman out of love, not out of lust, and just allowing yourself to just be filled with that goodness, because that is what your husband is doing. And the other thing I want to say is back to something that you said, Alicia, right toward the beginning of our conversation, is that like what Satan's trying to do is he's trying to have lots of sex before marriage and not very much sex in marriage. And so of course, Satan is going to get into your head and try to convince you that your husband is lusting after you and using you. Of course he wants you to think that, because he wants you to not have sex with him. And he wants you, Satan wants you to feel violated. And that is so wrong. And so, we kind of need to look at that thought and go, get behind me, Satan, like that, and just throw it out. Now, I'm not saying this to advocate. If you are in a situation where you feel uncomfortable about the way that your husband treats you or talks to you or anything like that, you need to speak that. You need to be clear about that. I do not like that you use those words. I don't like how you initiate that way. I don't like it when you touch me there or in that way or whatever. You need to bring those to the light. And that's very, very important.
Right.
But I think for the majority of cases, what we're talking about here is just a very difficult step of ultimate trust in our husband.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and as we're kind of like wrapping up here a little bit, like what would you, you know, for couples who want more from their physical intimacy, want more from their sexual relationship. We often talk about how couples should have conversations about what's working, what's not working, how, you know, how's it going, you know, which is a little uncomfortable even just to open it up. Would you give any topics or conversations or things that they should discuss as a couple to enrich and deepen
What's a good
and strengthen
conversation starter?
Yeah. Would you have any things that you would propose for them or are there other ways that you would encourage them to
So something
go deeper?
I like to recommend is actually setting aside 5 to 10 minutes every single day and saying, this is when we talk about sex. And challenging yourself to have a small conversation about sex every single day. And you might be challenged to find things to bring to that conversation, or sometimes you might not at all be challenged to find things. But what happens...
Depends on if you're a man or a woman, I guess, maybe. But, or maybe not. I'm just kidding.
But what happens a lot in marriages is that, you know, sex is shrouded in this discomfort and this shame. We don't want to talk about, we're uncomfortable talking about it. And so the conversations are few and far between about sex. And they're usually only when there's an issue, when there's a big problem. And because the conversations are so few and far between, we feel like we have to get it all out right at that moment in that conversation. Because who knows, we're not going to talk about sex again for 6 months, you know? And
it'd be overwhelming.
Yeah. Whereas if you are daily having a small conversation about sex, then you don't have to get it all out right then. Because you know you can come back to it tomorrow and you can chat about that same thing. And, you know, maybe you've had some time to think about it and you have a better way of saying it next time. But like bringing, and this conversation doesn't always have to be about fixing things. It can be as simple as, hey, I really liked what you did the other night. I really liked that you set all those candles out and that just really made me feel special. Or I really liked that text that you sent me in the middle of the day, back to that example. Or it can be, hey, you know, I'd like to see something more like this. Would you be comfortable with doing that? Or I'd really like to try this position. Would you be comfortable with that? And, you know, things like that.
Right.
That's great.
And that just opening up that conversation, that can prevent also those lies, because you have that, it's building trust.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing, is that when you have those conversations, it's building trust in the motivation of your spouse and seeing the heart of your spouse, you know, and just seeing their heart. And we as men and women just simply see the sexual union so differently, obviously the same, but also because we are two complementary bodies. And so it's like, especially at the beginning of marriage, those first 5 years, 10 years, where you're just learning, you know, you're learning about each other and you're learning about what works and what doesn't and what pleasures and what doesn't. And, you know, all of that, but that has to be built through conversations. And the beautiful thing is that you can learn to trust each other, you know, and then you have a beautiful dance that can go back and forth, you know, more easily.
Absolutely.
That is so good. Ellen, I hate to cut this off because I feel like there's a lot more we could be talking about, right?
We'll just have to have you on again. We'll just do all NFP another time.
Yeah. But for those who want to find out more, could you share a little bit more deeply about the courses that you offer, the coaching and the podcast, and where they can find you, what website they can look for you at?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my website is vinesinfullbloom.com. And I mentioned the orgasm course that I have. So it's called the Orgasm Course for Catholic Women, and it is all about sexual pleasure for women. Something that I hear a lot is kind of like, is it okay for us to be learning about that as Catholics? And I think we touched a little on that in our conversation, right? Of like, this is a good thing. This is such a beautiful gift that God made as part of our marriages and part of that sexual act. And one of the things, because this is so common that I hear a lot, is just women having no desire for sex. And one of the primary places I see that is because they're not having sex that is desirable. Like it's not pleasurable sex. And I don't blame you for not wanting to have sex if it's not pleasurable.
Right.
And so that's why I created that course, was to just really dig in. So we talk about the theology behind sexual pleasure. We talk about anatomy. We talk about mindset. We talk about just the team sport aspect of it. It is a course for Catholic women, but I've heard a lot of couples that take it together and enjoy watching it together, which is great if your husband's wanting to do that. So that you can find on my website. I also do one-on-one coaching. So if you want to kind of dig into, if there was something that you heard that just really sparked you, or maybe even something that made you feel very uncomfortable in our conversation from this podcast episode, I would love for you to reach out to me and let's chat about one-on-one coaching, because I want to help you journey into desiring good and holy sex with your spouse, because it is so good. It is so sacred. And it's something that I want you to enjoy in your marriage. And I want you to just be able to experience that beautiful fruit of deep intimacy. And sometimes that takes an investment of working one-on-one with somebody and just hearing the goodness. And the podcast that I host, Charting Toward Intimacy, it is toward no S. So just when you're searching it, just FYI, sometimes hindsight is 2020. I would not have named it with a confusing grammatical thing if I had known, but it's like, it's too late to rename my podcast. So I have to put that caveat out there, Charting Toward Intimacy. And we talk about, all of the kind of things that we just talked about in this conversation, more theological topics on sex and intimacy, more practical topics. We'll talk about MFP occasionally. So we just have a great time on the podcast over there. So definitely check that out.
Thank you so much, Ellen. This was such a fun conversation and just so very important. So thank you for all of you do all that you do. So we'll end the podcast with a stumbling over our words.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. This was perfect. This was perfect.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
So I hope you found that amazing, right?
Holy
Wasn't
cow.
it great? I feel like she brought up things and gave us tips and all of that.
Yeah, that some new nuggets that I was like, ooh, I hadn't actually thought about that
or
part of it.
Articulated in that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to give you 6 takeaways because there was so much there. So first of all, to remember, and if you want to just even like jot these down or just try to put them in your notes.
They'll be in the show notes, right?
They'll be in the show notes. Yes, they'll be in the show notes. So if you're on your next date night with your husband or with your wife, maybe you want to pull these out and just kind of talk about these key takeaways and see, hey, how do you feel about them? Expand on them. What are your thoughts on them? So first of all, part of foreplay is being aware of your spouse throughout the day and letting them know that you are thinking about them, right? Yeah. So just so they know that you are connected to them, and that is part of getting ready to be emotionally and physically intimate with each other later. Right. And part of being joyful in marriage means that you have a willingness to build intimacy through unity with your spouse. That you have that in your heart, and that's, I think, part of them letting them know that throughout the day is to letting them know, like, I want to build unity with you. How? Not just by being a partner with you, not just being a co-parent with you, but by being intimate with you. That's how we're going to really build our unity. Okay. And I think this is especially true for women with the changes in our cycle, and especially pre-pregnancy, post-pregnancy, all of that.
The struggles of...
If you have no desire for sex at all in a moment, right? And if you're like, I just cannot think of doing anything right now, ask yourself, what am I willing to do? And maybe even say that. Or if husband, ask your wife, well, where are you at? What are you willing to do? Maybe it's just snuggle on the couch. Maybe it's just a kiss. Maybe it's
physical
just we want to watch
intimacy is important,
a show.
even if it's not the full marital embrace, right? That's
exactly
vital to our relationship.
Where am I at? What am I willing to do? And kind of like going along with that, Mike's Angela's, it goes off all the time. Sorry about that, guys. But this, I also thought was a bold statement by her, which I really did appreciate. She said, no one should accept zero libido as a lifestyle. If you are like, I have had no desire for my spouse, for my wife, for my husband in months, that's not normal. Yeah. That is not how we were created. We were not created. There's something wrong. Maybe it's something physical that's wrong. Maybe it's something hormonal that's wrong. Maybe there's deeper issues in your own life, because that's not how we were created. And I thought that was a really beautiful testament to how we are created and God's plan for sexuality within marriage.
Yeah, yeah. And the last 2 points here, there are similarities between how we view prayer and how we deal this, or kind of look at sexual relations with our spouse, right? And we have to continually learn and grow in both of those areas. We don't want to stay stagnant. We want to continue to deepen our communion and our union with our Lord, as well as with our spouse. Mm-hmm. And finally, our Heavenly Father made sexual relations to be pleasurable, right? He desires your happiness. And he wants you to experience that and show you his love, right? And sometimes we don't fully appreciate or accept how much and how generous God the Father is to us. I mean, he created this to be beautiful, to be pleasurable, to commune two persons in such a way that it is beautiful and awesome.
And I think that if you are not experiencing that pleasure, or there's any hesitation within you, is it okay that I find this really pleasurable and amazing and awesome? And we would say, no, there is nothing wrong with that. You should give in.
That's the design.
That is the design. And to go and to be curious about how can we have more pleasure. Yes, God is like, yes.
In a holy and appropriate way.
You're using the gift the way that I wanted you to do in marriage with each other, to give yourselves to each other.
All right, so 3 takeaway points, questions for discussion for you. First, we want to just, as a kind of an encouragement or a challenge to you, really take 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe, are we saying daily? Are we going to say daily? We're going to say daily, right? Mm-hmm. Daily for 1 week to discuss sex with each other, right? So just take
for 1 week.
Just do it, because we too often we try to throw it all in on one topic, right? We talked about that a little bit.
It gets overwhelming.
And it gets overwhelming. But if we say, okay, we know we're going to have time to talk about this over the course of time. Some of us process differently. Mm-hmm. Things hit us differently. But it also spreads that out for greater reflection for us. So 1, take that time to do kind of a 1 week challenge of diving a little deeper and having that conversation, because those are not the easiest conversations sometimes to open up. So that's 1. 2, how often do we discuss our sex life? Just look at where we're at right now. What is holding us back from having that conversation? Again, we want to just challenge you to have the conversation, but maybe it's worth just saying, when's the last time we really talked about our sexual relationship and what's holding us back?
And then last, do I believe that sex is a sacred gift from God? Why or why not? And that is great things to talk about. So maybe these are your date night questions that you can take and discuss, and to improve your marriage and make it really what God really wants it to be.
Yes. And this, I hope you enjoyed this again. And if you did, please share, write a review on iTunes, do all that so that other people can benefit from it. Because we really think this is a powerful conversation, a topic for us to start into as married couples. And again, if you need any of the information on our Catholic Couples Getaway, any of the CatholicCouplesGetaway.com, but any of the resources we mentioned will be linked here in the show notes. Yep. So you can follow up more on that. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.